welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor, and this is my August reading wrap up. I read a lot in August, and I didn't even include it all in this list because at one point I got to the point I was rereading so many Austen variations that I just went, I'll just leave the ones that I've already included and I'll just not count anymore because I wasn't reading as much fan fiction, so I was reading a lot more of those, and it was a whole thing. But I did read, I think it was 13 things. So yeah, I read a lot. And I even managed to do some diversity stuff. So yeah, no, it all went really well. So what did I read? So the first thing I finished in August was a reread of In Default of Heirs Male by Jan Rowland, a Austen variation. This is one in which Mr. Bennet dies before the plot happens. But just as Mr. Collins comes to try and inherit, it's discovered that Mrs. Bennet is pregnant. So he can't inherit until we know whether the baby's a boy. So that changes the whole situation when the Bingleys and Darcy arrive in Meryton. So then I listened to the audiobook again of How to Marry a Werewolf by Gail Carriger, which is one of my favourite of her novellas. This one, I'm counting it as having major queer characters. It's actually like a heterosexual romance, but there are our favourite gay werewolves, Biffy and Lyle, hanging about in the background, prodding the action along, and laughing at Major Channing of the Chesterfield Channings, who has encountered an American who has been sent by her family to marry a werewolf because she has been disgraced and they don't know what else to do with her. And they dislike her, and Americans dislike the supernatural, so they figure the best thing they could do is send her to London for a London season and she can marry a werewolf. But she's got some quite painful secrets. And Major Channing of the Chesterfield Channings also has dark secrets in his past, but it ends up being such a sweet, funny book. I love it so much. Then I finished my reread of Persuasion by Jane Austen. So yeah, what can I say about that? This book has grown on me as I've gotten older. I understand a lot more now. It's one of the shorter novels, but it's still very sweet, and it's Austen, so you know. Then I listened to another Gail Carriger audiobook for one of her novellas, which is Defy and Defend. In this one, I'm also counting it as has reasonably important queer characters, in that the character of Justice the vampire is very clearly some sort of, he's not the main character, but he is very clearly like somewhere on the gender fluid spectrum, non-binary, likes running around in frilly nightgowns, kind of wants to change their pronouns to she and start wearing dresses, and so that's a whole part of the story. But this is the story of one of our characters from the finishing school novels, all grown up. She's sent off as an agent to try and fix a vampire hive which is going to the goth, which is never a good thing. And with her comes her safety, who is also the tuppenny knight that she's always wanted to marry, and now she's got to try and convince him that yes, she actually wants him. So all the while having 2 weeks to fix a vampire hive before they send in the Sundowners to kill them all. So there's a lot of redecorating and a lot of very bad art. So it's also one of my favourite of her novellas. Then I read, before I finished that, I actually read for uni this play, which is The Playboy of the Western World by John Millington Synge. Didn't love it, wasn't really my thing, had to read it for uni. It was a quick read. He's an Irish author. It's a play about peasants on the coast of Ireland. There's this whole thing about a murder that has or hasn't happened and is being boasted about. Yeah, not really my thing. After that, and after the Gail Carriger, I then read a couple more things for uni that I finished off by Virginia Woolf. So I read A Room of One's Own, which is her very famous feminist essay about why the things that prevent women from, and what women need to be able to write at the same pace and the same quality as men, which is essentially £500 in a room of one, £500 a year in a room of one's own. So an income and somewhere quiet to work. But women don't always have that opportunity. So there was that. And I also read her short story, Mrs. Dalloway of Bond Street. So this is the same character, I believe, from the Mrs. Dalloway novel, but it's essentially a slice of life. She's walking down the street, she's going to visit the glove shop, and she keeps seeing people and having thoughts, and it's just like a stream of consciousness short story. Wasn't my favourite thing ever, but you know, it was nice, I guess. Then I finished my reread of Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. This is the first of the Alphabet Squadron Star Wars books. I was rereading it because I actually want to finally read the second book, and I think there might be another one after that. I've got the second one sitting on my physical TBR shelf. So I wanted to, because I've completely forgotten most of what happened. So I've reread that. I really enjoy it. This also counts as a queer book because although there's very, very little mention of it in the actual book, Erica Quell, who is one of the main characters, as a former Imperial fighter pilot who has defected, she is canonically bisexual. So so I read like 3 books with queer characters this month. So yay! That's good for my very languishing goals. What did I read after that? Then I started switching back to more Austen variations. So I reread Follies and Nonsense by Martin Honeycutt, which is one in which, due to her fear of the entail, Mrs. Bennet convinced Mr. Bennet to arrange marriages with sons of his old school friends for Elizabeth and Jane. When the story opens, where it's a situation where Elizabeth has been married and widowed with a small child. Jane didn't even manage to get that far. She was engaged, but her husband was killed before the wedding because they were both in the military. And Mr. Bennet has gone off to see about an inheritance for Jane at the West Indies, so he's not around. And Elizabeth comes to visit in Meryton because she hasn't seen her family in a couple of years, and they needed some advice about getting a steward. So she tots off, and so she's a widow, and so it creates a very different dynamic. But also secretly she's a countess because her son is going to inherit an earldom, but she doesn't want anyone to know in Meryton. So that creates all sorts of interesting drama. And then I reread Master of Netherfield by the same author, which is one where old Mr. Darcy buys Netherfield for his son upon his graduation and coming of age, so he can learn properly by himself as an independent man to take control of an estate, but also so that he can get Darcy and in the end, Georgiana out of the house so he can move his mistress in. And so Darcy becomes neighbours with the Bennets very early on when Jane and Elizabeth are still not out. They're still sort of in their early to mid-teens. And so creates a very different relationship. Still going. So then I finally finished The Plot is Murder by V.M. Burns. So earlier in the year, I was like, I'm reading a lot of mysteries this year because that seems to be what I'm in the mood for, but they're all written by white women. So I went and I Googled a list of cozy mysteries by Black authors, and I had a look at it, and I picked one out to try. So that was The Plot is Murder. So this one is... The reason it caught my attention is because the main character is a bookstore owner who is attempting to write her own mystery novel, and then the realtor she bought the property for her bookstore off is found dead in her backyard, and so she ends up going to her nana for help, who brings along this whole cadre of retirees who ferret around for information and thoroughly enjoy themselves in the process while they try and figure out what's going on and why this guy is dead and who killed him. So that was fun. I actually, once I got started, like I started reading it in a period where I was picking up and putting things down a lot. So once I actually got in the groove of it, really enjoyed it, want to continue the series, so that's great. Then I finished, This All Come Back Now, edited by Michaela Saunders. So this is an anthology of all Indigenous First Nations speculative fiction, short stories. It was very, very interesting. Very much worth a read. A lot of them were a little more towards the literary end of speculative fiction for my tastes. But a lot of them discuss some very interesting issues, very interesting visions of the future. But yeah, it's very much worth a read. It wasn't quite to my taste, but quite thought-provoking. So that was good. And then I finished off the month by rereading another Martin Honeycutt variation, which was A Year Without a Summer, in which this particular one starts with Lizzie seeing really oddly coloured sunsets and sunrises. And what she doesn't realise is that means they're in for a very hard winter and a very cold summer after that, which means, so there's a lot in there about crops. And so it's still like a Elizabeth Darcy romance, but all behind it is this idea of the fact that, looking at the idea that estates are reliant on the land and what is produced from the land to feed themselves and to earn money. And so when you have a year without a summer and the crops don't grow and the hay doesn't grow to feed the animals, you really have to think about how you're going to survive until next year. So that's kind of an interesting one, where it has a very odd focus underneath the romance. Yeah, that's interesting. And that was the 13 things I think that I read in August. So I am almost caught up to my overall goal in terms of where I should be. I think I'm only a book or two behind right now. And I have read 2 books by authors of colour, and I have read 3 with queer characters. So I'm managing to actually catch up a little bit on my goals. I still need to really keep doing that though, which I'm probably going to read a lot in September because I am doing Steptember again this year. And so I'm probably going to spend most evenings at least walking on the treadmill at gym with my Kindle propped in front of me. So I'm thinking I'm going to read some novellas, which I've started, and I've just downloaded like the last 4 or 5 Uncanny magazines that I'm behind on. So I'm probably going to read a lot of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to hopefully get through a lot of reading this year, this month. So that would be really, really good. But yeah, happy to talk about any of the books I've been talking about in the comments with you. Oh, something's squeaking. And please like and subscribe, and I will see you all again really soon. Bye.